Thank you. At a young age, I had the privilege of discovering that helping others, serving others, inspired me. Through Volunteer Ambulance Corps, through Cub Scouts, through Big Brothers. And then the opportunity to wear this uniform to continue to serve. And now to have this privilege of commanding an organization that focuses on service. And so what I want to do is simply share the stories of what we do. March 11, 2011, a call came in, and you saw it on TV. Earthquake in Japan, followed by a tsunami. Very quickly, the call came and said, hey, can you help? And we had an air crew already in bed. They went down to LA and picked up the LA search and rescue team. To get them there as quickly as possible, we air refueled that aircraft nonstop into Japan. Why? Because by getting that aircraft there as quickly as possible, we were able to save lives. And that search and rescue team found people alive, making a difference. And so there we continue with humanitarian assistance, food and water, and other search teams, as you would expect. But Japan was a very different country than Haiti, where we had been the year before, and they just didn't need as much help from the international community. But that simple humanitarian assistance became a triple header, because very quickly they were concerned about the safety of those nuclear reactors, and were asked to fly in boron and dosimeters, asked to bring in the Navy nuclear assessment team to help them out. Because would they be survivable? Would they melt down? We were there to render assistance. And then all the families, we had 90,000 military family members stationed in Japan. And they said, we're not sure we want to stay. Can we come home to be with our families? And so the leadership said, yes, come on home. And we actually started moving families from Japan, US military families, initially up to Seattle. But it was spring break and we overwhelmed them. So then we started moving them down to Travis Air Force Base because we had taken all their aircraft and they were actually helping in Japan and Afghanistan. And what amazed me most is to see these airmen and their families and the community grab these people off the aircraft and say, what do you need? We need diapers for the baby, your dog. How can we help the dog? Dog food. Do you need to see a priest? Do you need to see a lawyer, a medical provider? Because this was going to be their last stop at a military base before we put them on an aircraft to be with their moms and dads across the country. And to see the way these airmen reached out to support a people they didn't know, fellow military family members, it warms your heart. And by the same time that's occurring, a call came in right here to Scott Air Force Base, Code Black. Code Black means somebody's going to be without something within 72 hours. And the call came from Afghanistan, where Romanian soldiers at a FOB, an outpost called Akgar, were going to be without fuel within 72 hours. And fuel was so much more than just their power. It sustained their life. We said, okay, well, just get to your drop zone. We'll drop the fuel and you'll be good to go. No, sir, we can't get to our drop zone. There are so many IEDs along the road that we can't get out there. Can you drop on top of us? It'd be so easy to say, no, we can't, because we'd risk hurting them or their installation. But we said, yes, we can. And when our airmen hang up that phone, they go, how are we going to do this? That's when their innovation just amazes me. We sent a captain out there to assess, and he said, yeah, you got to drop on top of them. So our riggers, our tacticians figured out a way to come in with the chutes. We're basically dropping these 55-gallon drums, dropping 80 of them inside this outpost to give them the fuel to sustain their operations. And that C-17 took off with the special chutes, and 19 of the 20 bundles dropped within the outpost. One was just outside. They quickly recovered it. And because we were able to get the fuel to them, they could sustain their operations, they could clear the IEDs, they could be free from snipers, and they could continue their mission. And that following September, their mission was complete, and they got to turn over their outpost to the Afghan National Army, and they got to go home to Romania. That's what it means to serve. At the same time, we got a call from, this time, a province in northern Afghanistan called Nuristan. And they said, look, the Taliban are squeezing us. They want us to capitulate, and we don't want to do that. But they've cut off our food, and we're going to starve. Can you help? And of course, the call came in, and we said yes. This village was in the bottom of a valley, very steep valley, and they needed rice and tea. And our riggers began doing that. 50,000 pounds of rice and tea were assembled in an aircraft. We call it 1 million cups of tea for this airdrop, because the aircraft was going to come over at 17,000 feet and drop this tea and drop this rice. But we couldn't drop it inside the village because we'd crush their homes. So we had to find a place outside the village in that valley. But if we just dropped there, the Taliban would have gotten all the tea and the rice. So we actually went with NATO, and they said, look, we'll bring the Afghan National Army in there. We'll put them in by helicopters. They can secure this drop zone. So when you drop, they'll be there. And so this C-17, a machine of war, but today it was a wing of hope, came and dropped 50,000 pounds of rice and tea. And the Afghan National Army was there to recover it. And one of the most amazing things is, yes, the village continued to thrive because they had rice and tea. But the most amazing thing, ladies and gentlemen, is that for the first time, this village got to see the Afghan National Army there in a humanitarian assistance role, recovering this tea and this rice and actually handing it out to the citizens of the village. And for the first time, they understood what this new Afghan National Army could mean to them, helping them when they needed help the most. But what if we didn't need to have that drop zone? What if we didn't need to basically have to, and we could have just basically flown and dropped the food and water right over the village? This is humanitarian ration. We'll drop it out of the aircraft. It's 2.3 pounds. It falls at 50 miles an hour, and if it hits you, it's going to hurt you. So our airmen said, well, sir, what if we do it differently? What if we innovate? What if we come up with some packaging, we put food and water in, 6 ounces, and we put something around that slows it down so it falls like a leaf. This is called the Hope Package. We're testing them right now. It's successful. So what this will allow us to do is fly over an urban area, anywhere in the world, and out will come food and water that will flutter down very low speed and not hurt anybody. And when 70% of the world's population is going to be moving to urban locations by 2050, this will enable us to be anywhere in the world with our aircraft in about 18 hours, open up the doors, and provide humanitarian assistance. This is what it means to innovate. And if I go back to that outpost, what if I had the capability to put a GPS and to guide that parachute down so it would fly right to their front door? So I never have to ask those soldiers to go out to an outpost outside and pick up. That's what we're trying to do, and that's why this innovation is so very important, is we answer the call. But you know, sometimes we actually have to answer the call because the act of an individual. Sometimes the act of an individual can be so devastating that we have to respond. And that was the case in Libya, when Gaddafi threatened to unleash the military on his old citizens. And the call went out across the world. UN responded, the coalition was assembled, and we got the call. Ray, how quickly can you get 28 tankers, air refueling aircraft from the States over to support Libya? Because what we need to do is put a coalition force, an overhead presence, to keep this man from killing his own people. And we'll do it with a coalition of fighters. But for them to stay overhead Libya, they have to be able to have air refueling. And so these airmen all across our country, active guard and reserve, got the call. And that night, 564 airmen said goodbye to their families instead of good night. And they got on tanker aircraft, KC-135s and KC-10s, and flew around the world, halfway across the world, to support people they didn't even know. And when they landed there, they quickly went and started turning these aircraft, refueling the aircraft. Our tacticians went and said, what are the routes? The mission planners, our maintenance folks. And that next morning, this entire armada of aircraft took off at the end of March and went over the sea and refueled these fighters. And they kept that canopy of protection over Libya from the end of March till the mission was complete in October. These tankers refueled 12,000 fighter attack coalition aircraft. There are thousands of Libyans who are alive today, in part because overhead was this protection of support that kept them alive and kept this man from killing his own people. And those aircraft were overhead, in part because air refueling assets provided that fuel to them so they could stay in contact. And those tankers were there, I would offer you, because airmen all across our country said goodbye to their families on a phone call, left them that night, and flew to support a people. Makes a huge difference. And these airmen, 135,000 active guard and reserve. Airmen, many are in your hometown, who serve and do this mission. The mission first of delivering hope with airdrop and airlift. The mission of air refueling, fueling a fight or giving our nation this capability of global reach and global power to put a presence anywhere in the world. And the third thing we do, I would offer, is aeromedical evacuation, saving lives. In Vietnam, when I came in the Air Force back in the 70s, you had a 70% probability of living if you were injured in the battlefield. It took us 45 days to get you from the battlefield back to the hospital in the States. We got better, and by Desert Storm, you had a 90% probability of living, and it took us about 10 days to get you back home. Right now, we use 98% probability if we get you into the aeromedical evacuation system that you will live. And we say we get you home in 3 days, but if you need to be somewhere, we'll get you from a point of injury back to the States in less than 24 hours. We literally have thousands of airmen who do this for one person. Does it make a difference? It did in the case of Sergeant Thomas Moore. Sergeant Moore was in Ramadi, in Iraq, basically just working on his MRAP. And he was discharging his fire extinguisher when it hit him in the chest and killed him. He's done. At some point in time, we're not sure when, some soldiers came by and administered CPR. And they were able to take Sergeant Moore to the forward surgical unit, where they actually got him in and said, okay, he's got a heartbeat, he's not responsive, he's comatose. And we're not sure how much damage to him because we don't know how long he was dead, how long his brain was without oxygen. So they said, okay, so what's his best chance of surviving? We can't really do much for him here in Baghdad. We need to get him to a higher level of care. They said the best way to protect him from further injury basically is to lower his body temperature, to put him in hypothermia. But because as medical folks, it's called therapeutic hypothermia. But how do you do this in Baghdad? How do you go about this? And literally, the doctors got on the internet. Okay, how do we bring it? Okay, 89, 90 degrees, we can do this. Where do we get ice? Okay, go to the chow hall, go to the fire department and get as much ice as you can and put it in bags and start bagging him and start lowering his body temperature. We can do that. Okay, let's take some ice and put it in a blender and put it down inside his stomach and up his bladder. We can do this. Okay, with the blenders from the chow hall. Oh, and let's also take all the IV fluids that we have to give him and put him through a freezer so by the time they get to his body, it continues to lower his body temperature. So they got him down to 90 degrees. And we actually had to start monitoring his cranial pressure because that's the first place we'll see swelling and permanent damage. And by the time they got his temperature down, we had prepared an aircraft. Our maintainers had basically pre-flighted, we refueled the aircraft, we configured the aircraft, all to basically transport Sergeant Moore. We got our aeromedical evacuation team, we got our critical care teams in that aircraft. Their challenge was get him to Germany, to Landstuhl, to Ramstein Air Force Base as quickly as possible and to keep him alive in the transport. It's a 6.5-hour flight. They got there as quickly as they could because about 20 minutes into the flight, they said, push it up. Sergeant Moore's pulse was down to 30. We almost lost him 6 times on that flight. But they managed to keep him alive and get him to Landstuhl, where he stayed there for 2 days as they started bringing up his body temperature. He quickly went from Landstuhl to San Antonio for the highest level of care at our facilities there, and that's where he wakes up. He wakes up and says, wow, where am I? I was in Ramadi. What happened? And think about it. It's amazing. Hundreds of people came together to support and care for one soldier. Does it make a difference? It sure did in his life because he's returned to his unit. He's back on active duty. We call him our miracle soldier. And if I step back from just these couple stories and I think about what we do, I know this. Someone somewhere needs something. It could be a soldier in southern Afghanistan calling for resupply. It could be an A-10 pilot calling for an air refueling so he can stay overhead with that canopy of protection for our soldiers on the ground. It could be a medic calling for an air medical evacuation to save a critically wounded warfighter. Or it could be a mom and dad, a family, who are calling for their son or daughter who paid the ultimate sacrifice in bringing them home on their final journey. It could be a victim of a disaster here at home or halfway around the world who's calling for aid. It could be a citizen who just wants to stand up to a ruthless dictator so they have a chance to govern their nation. Or simply a mother, but ever so important, saying, please give me some medical care so my child can live. we don't know their names. And often we don't know their stories if we even get to hear of them some months later. But we know this: we are here to answer their call. We're here with machines of war sometimes, or wings of hope, to respond to wherever that call comes in. Because if we answer their call and we say, yes, we can, they will prevail, they will survive, they will thrive. I would offer to you that when we talk about service, this truly defines servant leadership. And this is why I'm so proud to have a chance to continue serving by wearing this uniform. Thank you.